Hello YouTube, my name is Alex. You can call me Yoxy you can call me the Cola, whatever tickles your fancy. Today I have a video for Phenax, the God of Deception. It is a deck tech purely based on milling out your opponents and winning the game. There are some combos in this deck, hence the reason I have this card for today. Since I've played this deck, I've taken it apart in real life. I have it online, but I don't have it in real life anymore because I've stopped liking to use infinite combos. I just feel I don't like it when the game just ends right then and there. But this deck has combos in it, and they are really strong. I've won with this deck a ton of times. It's very mean, especially if you feel bad when you mill someone. You're going to be milling them out pretty consistently. So this is a very strong deck. Please let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, comment below, and let's see what I have for you today. Thank you. Today we are taking a look at my Phenax God of Deception deck tech. This is a mill deck. Phenax the God of Deception is 3 colorless mana, a blue and a black for a legendary enchantment creature god. Indestructible, as long as your devotion to blue and black is less than 7, it's not a creature. It's a 4/7, but the most important part about this card is creatures you control have tap. Target player puts top X cards of his or her library into their graveyard, where X is that creature's toughness. So there are some cards in this deck that they have big butts, so you can tap them and dump a bunch of cards off the top of your opponent's libraries into the graveyard. There isn't a strategy in this deck for self-mill. There's no Laboratory Maniacs or Thassa's Oracles, anything like that. This deck is really strong. There are some combos in the deck, so if you don't like playing combos, then this one might not be your cup of tea. But I think that Dimir is the best color combination for mill decks, so let's go ahead and see what we got for this. So we're going to start off with one of the less exciting parts of the deck, and that's just the lands and the ramp. Like other videos, I'm not going to talk about the lands in the deck tech. There will be a list in the description below of the actual full deck, just because that's a big part of budget for a deck. So if you have the money to put in to get the lands that you want, definitely do it, but it also depends on your play group. So I'll leave that off for this video, but it will be on the deck list. As far as ramp goes, there are 9 pieces of ramp in this deck. Nothing super crazy. Arcane Signet, Dimir Signet, Felwar Stone, Mind Stone, Soul Ring, Star Compass, Talisman of Dominance, Wayfarer's Bauble, and then the only one I kind of want to talk about is Unstable Obelisk. I like this card in decks that have problems getting rid of certain permanents. Blue and black don't have the best ways of dealing with enchantments and artifacts, so I like to have this in the deck just to know that if there is something on the board that's really hindering the deck, there is a way of getting rid of it, but you just need to find it. And it's a pretty, it's 3 mana for an artifact that taps for colorless, 7 mana tap and sack it to destroy target permanent. That's really costly, but at the same time, this is only something that we need to use in dire situations. So with that being said, let's move on to the card advantage section. So for card draw, we have 10 cards in the deck that are just devoted to drawing us cards and getting us card advantage. Fact or Fiction is a really good card. If you can get political with it, you can sometimes make a deal with the opponent that you're giving the piles to, and they can just give you all 5 cards in exchange for a favor or something. I really like this card in Commander. Jace, Memory Adept, is made for a mill deck, it looks like. Its +1 is draw a card. Target player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard, so that's nice. You're drawing a card and you're milling someone. The 0 is target player puts the top 10 cards of their library into their graveyard. Very nice, still on theme. And then the -7, any number of target players each draw 20 cards. You can use this for yourself, definitely. Drawing 20 cards would be insane, but you can also use this if an opponent has a low amount of cards left in their deck, and then you can just use this to kill them off. Patient Rebuilding is both awesome and terrible at the same time. It is 3 colorless and 2 blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, target opponent mills 3. For each land card they mill, you draw a card. I have been super pleased with this card in the past, and then other times I've paid 5 mana and it's given me nothing. So it's a little random. I like it in the deck most of the time, but I've thought about taking it out just based on the games that it's done nothing for me. So this card is up to you if you want to throw it in there, obviousry. Phyrexian Arena, nothing really to say. It's nice just to draw an extra card. We don't really care about losing 1 life. Pilfered Plans. Target opponent mills 2. Well, player, but you're always going to target an opponent. And then you're going to draw 2 cards. Recurring Insight. As I've mentioned in previous videos, this is just my favorite card, period, in Commander, but it's so good at drawing cards that for 4 mana, or 4 colorless and 2 blue, you're going to draw cards equal to the number of cards in target opponent's hand. Since we're playing Commander, that's going to usually be at least 3 or 4 cards, but usually more than that. And then Rebound, it's just going to cast again at the beginning of your next upkeep. So you're getting to cast this twice. You draw so many cards off this card. It's one of my favorite cards in Commander. Rhystic Study. It's Rhystic Study. 2 colorless and a blue. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you can draw a card unless they pay 1. You're going to annoy your opponents, but you're also going to draw cards off this. Sire Stagnation is a very good card. It's not milling, it's exiling. So you're still thinning out their library. But I feel like there are a lot more decks currently that care about landfall and putting a ton of lands into play. And Sire Stagnation, it triggers every time any land comes into a play for an opponent. So they're going to exile the top 2 cards of their library, and then you're just going to draw 2 cards. So if this thing is left out there, it's not only a scary 5/7, but it's going to draw you a ton of cards and thin out your opponent's libraries pretty quickly. Siphon Mind, I just like this card in black decks because most of the time it's a 4 mana, you draw 3, and then each opponent discards 1, which is good value. Obviously it loses some of its value if you only have 1 or 2 opponents left, but it's still a really good card. And then lastly is Visions of Beyond. 1 blue mana to draw a card. If a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it instead of draw 3. This deck puts a ton of cards into graveyard, so you're almost always going to be able to cast this for 1 mana to draw 3. I guess if you are in super desperation mode and a graveyard somehow doesn't have 20 or more cards in it, you can use it just to cantrip and draw a new card, but most of the time you're going to be drawing 3 cards off this. Okay, so now we're going to look at the removal for this deck, but some of these removal pieces actually also kind of can combo off, so I'll talk about that when we get to them. The first one is Crypt Incursion, 2 colorless and a black. Exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard. You gain 3 life for each card exiled this way. So you can use this to gain life. A lot of the cards in our deck care about creatures being in graveyards. But if somebody's playing like a Marin deck or someone else has a lot of value coming out of their graveyard, you can use this to slow them down. Decree of Pain is a good board wipe. It's expensive, but I'm greedy, so I like to draw cards. So destroy all creatures that can't be regenerated, draw a card for each creature destroyed this way. I just like being able to wipe the board and draw cards for each one of them, so I like this card. Didn't Say Please. It's a 3 mana counterspell with the bonus of its controller mills 3. I can justify taking this out of the deck for a better counterspell. Milling only 3 cards when we're playing with decks that have 100 cards in them isn't that significant, but it's on theme, so I have it in the deck. Drown in the Loch. Blue, black, instant. So you can choose one. Destroy target creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard, or counter target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Because we're milling everyone so much, this basically is just 2 mana, destroy a creature, or counter a spell. It's a pretty good card in the deck. It's good for protecting stuff that you need if you want to use a counter spell, and it's good at getting rid of problems. Eater of the Dead is a combo piece. This with our commander. So our commander, if you remember, you can tap a creature that you control and target opponent, or target player, but you're going to choose an opponent, will mill cards equal to the toughness. So Eater of the Dead is a 3/4 creature. If you tap it to Phenax's ability, you will mill someone for 4 cards. You can also then pay 0 to remove a creature card from a graveyard and then untap Eater of the Dead. So you pay 0, exile a creature from a graveyard, and you can untap Eater of the Dead. You can then tap it again to Phenax's ability. And then if there's another creature, then you can pay 0 and exile it, untap it again. And you can keep doing this as long as there are creatures in the graveyard. And This is actually the combo that I hit in one game that made me feel bad that I was doing it to my friends, because it's not like an infinite I automatically win right now combo. It's a I'm probably gonna win, but you guys are gonna have to watch me do this for a little bit. Watch me rip the decks out of your hands, and you're just gonna see all your cards disappear, and you're not gonna get to use any of them. It's really, really good. I think this card is excellent in this deck. Grizzly Spectacle, 2 colorless and 2 black. Destroy target non-artifact creature. I don't know why it has to be non-artifact creature, but whatever. Its controller mills equal to the creature's toughness or power. So creatures in Commander can get pretty huge. Most of the time, this is probably just going to end up milling someone between 1 and like 5 cards. But if they do have a massive creature and you can take advantage of this, definitely do it. Hero's Downfall, just a really good removal spell. Destroy target creature or planeswalker, very strong. Induce Paranoia, 4 mana counterspell that if you use black mana to pay for its mana cost, they also mill X, where X is the spell's converted mana cost. Most of the time, not going to win you the game, but if somebody has infinite mana and they try to cast a gigantic spell, then guess what? You can actually just mill them out and stop their win. King Makar, the Gold Cursed. This is a great card with Phenax because you don't have to attack with it to tap it. You can tap it to Phenax's ability to mill somebody for 3, and then every time you untap King Makar, you can exile a creature, and then you also gain a gold artifact token. So this will help you get some mana, and it just exiles creatures. Very strong. And then Thought Collapse. Counter target spell. Its controller mills 3 cards. This is literally the exact same thing as Didn't Say Please. Again, if you want to run different counter spells, you can, because these only are milling people for 3 cards, and we have a lot more efficient ways of doing it. But they're on theme, so I like to have them in the deck. So we've now hit that point in the video that we're going to talk about some of the creatures that we can use Phenax's ability with, and we're going to get a ton of value out of it. Not value, we're going to make our opponents incredibly sad with it. So this card I actually don't have in the deck. I saw that it was new, and I added it to the deck list. I had no idea it's $50. You do not need to run this if you don't want to. Run a wall. Run Wall of Frost. It's just a 3 mana wall that you can tap and mill someone for 7 with Phenax. But this card, if you do have it, you're going to want to throw it in the deck. Bruvek the Grandiloquent. It is a 1/4 creature that if an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill twice that many cards instead. I feel like I don't have to explain why that's so great in this deck. It's just awesome. Geth, Lord of the Vault. 4 colorless and 2 black for a 5/5 zombie. You can pay X and a black to put an artifact or creature card with converted mana cost X from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control tapped. Then that player mills X. The mills X is kind of nice, but the ability to take artifacts or creatures out of our opponent's graveyards is very strong, because since we're milling them so much, they're going to have useful stuff for us in their graveyard too. Most of the time, we're not going to be using its ability every turn. I think it's just a good mana sink if we don't really have anything else going on. Mordivore, 2 colorless and 2 black. The longer the game goes on, the stronger this thing's going to get. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards, which is a little annoying to have to keep track of, but it's a very strong card because whatever its power and toughness are, tapping it to Phenax's ability, you're going to be able to mill someone for that much. So if for some reason there's only, let's say it's close to the beginning of the game, there's only 10 creature cards in the graveyards, it's a 10/10. You can then mill someone with it so they mill 10 cards. Now, if 3 of those are creatures, you're milling someone for 13. So it just keeps getting better and better and better. Night Howler, pretty sure it's the same thing. Let's see here. It has Bestow, so you can put it on a creature. Night Howler and Enchanted Creature each get +X, where X is the number of all creature cards in all graveyards. Yeah, so it's a very similar effect to Mordivore, except you can put this on another creature that's already on the battlefield. So you can tap it, and it doesn't need haste, so you can tap it right away. Silent Arbiter, 4 colorless mana for an artifact. It's a 1/5. The 5 is nice because we can tap it to mill someone for 5, but it also keeps people from attacking us with more than one creature. We're usually going to have a big, creature sitting there to block because we have creatures that, as I've said before, they have a lot of toughness, and we're going to be fine blocking most of the time. Tree of Perdition is very mean. It is a 3 colorless and a black for a plant that has Defender. It's a 0/13. Exchange. You can tap it to exchange target opponent's life total with Tree of Perdition's toughness. So the reason this card is really good, obviously, is because if you play this early, you're pretty much putting someone from 40 life all the way down to 13. And in most decks, that's where Tree of Perdition's annoyance ends. But in this one, it just keeps getting worse because you have Phenax out there. If this thing is now a 0/40, you can tap it to mill someone for 40 cards. So this is a disgusting card. It's mean, but it's hard not to use it. And then White of Precinct 6. It's a 1/1 zombie. It gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your opponent's graveyards. It's like a worse version of Mortivore and Night Howler, but it's very strong. I have 3 cards here. I didn't know where to put them, like as far as like the other categories go, so I have Synergy, and we'll just read what the 3 of them are. Memory Plunder. Cast an instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost. You can get a really good spell with this because we're building so many cards. You are probably going to have access to very powerful spells. It just depends on what your opponents are playing. I think it's a fun card in the deck. Lightning Greaves. Giving our creatures haste is important because, first of all, you can equip it for a 0, and then creatures that have haste, you can tap them to Phenax's ability the turn that you cast them. So that's just really nice. And then you can also protect pieces like Tree of Perdition and other big scary things because they have Shroud. Intruder Alarm can also be a combo piece, but again, it's not an I automatically win combo piece. It is just, this is going to keep getting worse for your opponent's combo piece. 2 colorless and a blue. Creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps. Whenever any creature comes into play, untap all creatures. So the way you use this in the deck is you leave all your creatures untapped so that they can block. And then as soon as somebody goes to cast a creature, in response to them casting that, tap all your creatures, mill whoever you want to for as many toughness as you have on the field. And then when that creature comes into play, all your creatures untap again. So basically, anytime a creature is coming into play, you can abuse the Phenax's ability to mill people. And then there's also a card that I'll talk about in a little bit here in our milling section. But basically, whenever a creature card is put into a graveyard from their library, you will make a zombie. So that means that when this is out there, you'll mill somebody, a creature will go into the graveyard, that will untap your creatures because another creature is coming into play. So you can basically keep doing that as long as you're hitting a creature with your milling. And again, that is a combo that could just win you the game. So this is the part of the deck that is the most exciting because this is all the cards that are going to help us win the game by just throwing your opponent's libraries right into their graveyard. The first one is Altar of Dementia. Some creatures in the deck don't have a ton of power, but certain ones like Mortivore, Night Howler, and White of Precinct 6, they could get pretty scary, pretty mean. So it's nice to be able to sacrifice them, and their power and toughness, again, are based on all the creatures in graveyards. So you can sack them and get a big mill effect from this. I also want to talk about Consuming Aberration before I talk about Altar of the Brood. Consuming Aberration is just a far better version of Mortivore and the ones I've mentioned previously. Power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards. That is all cards, it's not just creatures. And then whenever you cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card, and then they put all those cards into the graveyard. This is another card that you can stack to Altar of Dementia, but also it's just horrifying. So this is one of the best cards in the entire deck. Altar of the Brood is a good turn 1 play. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. So you can get good value out of this throughout the game just by doing what you're doing, but everyone's going to be milling more than they normally would. Again, you know what? I'm going to talk about it right now. I had mentioned Undead Alchemist when I was talking about Intruder Alarm. This is the card that if a zombie you control would deal damage to a player, instead that player mills that many cards from the top of their library. That's fine. We're not really going to be attacking. It's whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from his or her library, exile that card and put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. So with Intruder Alarm, I mentioned how this works and it can be a combo piece. With Altar of the Brood, it's another one of those combos that doesn't have infinite. It's not infinite. It's going to end at some point, but you just don't know when, because what's going to happen is you are going to have somebody mill a creature card. When that creature card goes to their library, instead it's exiled, you make a 2/2 zombie. You made a 2/2 zombie. That's a permanent. Since a permanent entered the battlefield, each opponent mills one card. One of those was a creature. You make another zombie. Then more Altar of the Brood. So it just keeps going over and over and over again until eventually people don't mill creatures. Court of the Cunning is new from Commander Legends. I really like the Monarch effect. I think having that in the game is awesome because I like drawing cards, and it lets people that have more aggressive decks gain value throughout the game. But this one is at the beginning of your upkeep, any number of target players each mills 2 cards. Right there, that's nice. Just milling your opponents, all of your opponents for 2 cards each is great. If you're the Monarch, mill each of those players by 10. That is pretty gross. So I'm excited to see how this card works in the deck. Fraying Sanity. Enchant player, at the beginning of each end step, enchanted player, they mill again what they milled during that turn. So this happens every turn. As many cards are going into their graveyard, you are having them do it again. So with cards like Traumatize and Maddening Cacophony, which are both listed in this section as well, those cards just make you mill half your library. If you do that to somebody that has Fraying Sanity, at the end of the turn, they're just going to mill the rest of their deck. Same thing where if you have Tree of Perdition and you have now made it a 0/40 and you tap it to mill the person that's enchanted by this, they're going to mill the 40 and then they're going to mill 40 more at the end of the turn. So this card can kill people pretty fast. Hedron Crab is just a good one mana drop, turn 1 spell. It's a creature that's an 0/2, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, target person mills 3 cards. There is a better one of these that they just printed that I will talk about in a little bit here. Keening Stone is expensive, but deadly. It's a 6 mana artifact. You have to pay 5 mana and tap it, but then target player mills X, where X is the number of cards in their graveyard. Basically, that means if you already have somebody halfway dead, you're just going to kill them with this card. So it's a really strong card. It's just a lot of mana to get out there, so I don't know. It's not my favorite card in the deck, but it's strong if you get it to work. Okay, so the next card is Maddening Cacophony, which is a 2 mana sorcery. Each opponent mills 8 cards. If this spell was kicked, instead each opponent mills half of their library. So that's incredible because the card Traumatize, which I'll talk about in a second here, was the original opponent mills half their library card, and it's 5 mana and it's only one opponent. This is 6 mana and it's all of your opponents. So this card is crazy. I can't wait to see how this works out in the deck. Manic Scribe is a 2 mana 0/3 wizard. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent mills 3. Pretty good. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, then that player puts 3 cards from their library into their graveyard. So this one actually does, this card cares a little bit about what's in our graveyard. For the most part, it's out there for its initial ability, and then once we do hit the delirium requirements, it's nice to have somebody mill. Each opponent's going to mill 3 cards each of their turns, so that's a good card. Memory Erosion, 3 mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player mills 2. This is, for most people, it's just going to be a hindrance. If you're playing against a Storm deck, it's possible to mill a ton of cards off them. It's a good card. Hopefully it draws some hate, because we have other pieces that we hope they don't get rid of, but I don't know. It's an okay card. Mind Funeral, 3 mana. Target opponent reveals cards from the top of his or her library until they reveal 4 land cards, and that player puts all cards revealed this way into his or her graveyard. This is a good card. This has the potential to only mill someone for 4 for 3 mana, which is not great, but for 4 land cards, they can go pretty deep in their deck for this. So this has done a lot of work for me in the past. Mind Grind is basically Mind Funeral, except more expensive, because Mind Funeral, you have to, it's 3 mana, and it's until 4 lands are revealed. But Mind Grind is for each opponent instead of target opponent, so that's why this card's really good. So if you have like 6 or 7 mana, you can have X be 5 or 6, or 4 or 6, 4 or 5, and then you can have your opponents reveal cards from their library until they reveal X land cards. So you can have a lot of your opponents go pretty deep in their deck with this card. Psychic Corrosion. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. This is mostly just so it builds up incrementally over the game. You're not, I mean, you have Recurring Insight, which can draw you a lot of cards, so that can mill a lot of your opponents. The Jace ultimate, where you draw 20 cards, is also effective with this, but most of the time this is just milling people slowly over the game. Riddle Keeper, 2 colorless and a blue. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's controller puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. It's kind of like Propaganda or Ghostly Prison, except they have to mill instead of paying mana or paying life. This is really good against decks that like to go wide. Rune Crab. This is the one that I mentioned is better than the original crab, the Hedron Crab. It's 1 mana. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 3 cards instead of just choosing one person. So this card is very good. I haven't got to use this one yet either, but I feel like it's going to be a good addition to the deck. Sewer Nemesis is Consuming Aberration's little brother. It only targets one person. When that person casts a spell, they mill the top card of their library. And Sewer Nemesis, its power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in the chosen player's graveyard. So, like Consuming Aberration, you can sack this to Altar of Dimension to mill someone for a ton. You can also tap it to Phenax's ability to mill someone for a ton. You're just going to want to make sure that you pick the right person, someone that's going to have a lot of cards in their graveyard for a little while. Then don't get rid of them initially. Get rid of the other players, because Sewer Nemesis, if you get rid of the player that you've chosen for its power and toughness, then they have no cards in their graveyard, and Sewer Nemesis just dies. So get rid of the other opponents first, if you can. Sphinx's Tutelage is 2 colorless and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent puts 2 cards from his or her library into their graveyard. If they are both non-land cards that share a color, repeat this process. Very good against, obviously, monocolored decks. It's just good to have out there. Again, it's another enchantment that we have just for incremental milling throughout the game. Traumatize. As I mentioned before, this is just a worse maddening cacophony. Traumatize is target player puts top half of his or her library rounded down into his or her graveyard. That's great. If you have Fraying Sanity on someone with either of those 2 cards, then they just lose the game. And then we've already talked about Undead Alchemist, so those are all the big milling effects that we have in the deck. And you can win the game by milling people out, but we have some better ways, and I'll talk about that next. So the last part of this video, we're going to talk about the other ways this deck wins. First, I'm just going to mention Bone Horde probably shouldn't be in this section. It's another version of Night Howler. So it's good, but it's not something that's going to win us the game. But something like Blood Chief Ascension is going to win us the game. First of all, it's 1 mana, which is insane. And then at the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, put a quest counter on Blood Chief Ascension. You need to have 3 quest counters on this for it to turn on, but once it turns on, you're going to be able to kill the whole table if you have the right cards in your hand, because whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you may have that player lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. So not only is this going to gain you a ton of life, if you traumatize someone with this on the battlefield, they die. If you mill somebody for 30 cards in a turn with this out there, or sorry, 20 cards in a turn with this out there, they die. This card is nuts, and is probably the way this deck wins the most, is because it just gets out there. If people don't get rid of it, you're going to win the game. Guilt Feeder, I think, is a funny card because it's just a 0/4 with fear. It looks actually fairly harmless when you play it, but whenever it attacks and isn't blocked, defending player loses 1 life for each card in their graveyard. We fill up graveyards so quickly. If this thing gets through, which it usually will because it has fear, it's going to kill people. And people don't realize it until they're like, okay, it's a 0/4. What does it do? Wait, what? Yeah, so the game just ends for them right then and there. Sir Conrad the Grim is a 5 mana worse version of Blood Chief Ascension, but it's still pretty good. Whenever a creature card is put into a graveyard, basically from anywhere, so if you mill somebody and it's a creature card, Sir Conrad does 1 damage to each opponent, and that's each time any creature card goes from a library into a graveyard for us. So when we mill creatures, if we mill 3 creatures off of 1 person, each opponent is taking 3 damage, which is really strong. So it's a good card. I said it's a worse version of Blood Chief Ascension. That's just because Blood Chief Ascension is nuts. Sir Conrad the Grim is also very good. And then there is another combo in here. This one is an infinite combo. Duskmantle Guildmage. The only thing we really care about, I have never actually paid 4 mana to mill someone for 2, but I have paid 3 mana to have, whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere this turn, that player loses 1 life. That by itself, we mill so many cards that by itself can kill somebody if we are set up with our other mill engines. But then if you combo that with Mind Crank, they only have to mill 1 card or lose 1 life, and then they just lose because it's an infinite loop where they will lose life and then they'll mill cards and then they'll mill cards, so they lose life, and it just ends the game right there. So those are the other ways that this deck can win. I've won this with this deck just by milling people out a lot, but these cards right here are the most consistent ways that the deck wins. We have reached the end of the video. Thank you to all those who are watching my videos and letting me know what you think about them. I'm going to keep making videos for the time being on deck techs. I have plans to record some games online, and I'm going to try to edit them down so I can get some gameplay videos as well, so you can actually see some of the decks that I'm using. If you have any other recommendations, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep doing this because I'm having fun with it. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.